I'm Amy Goodman. President-elect Donald Trump tried to distance himself during his campaign from Project 2025, the radical right-wing plan for a second term. But on Friday, he nominated a key architect of the plan, Russell Vought, to lead the Office of Management and Budget once again. Vought had led the office during Trump's first term for a time. The Trump loyalist wrote the chapter of Project 2025 that lays out how to redefine the executive branch by firing thousands of civil servants. He's also supported deploying the military here at home. In a minute, we'll be joined by the ProPublica reporter whose recent investigation of Vought is headlined, "Put Them in Trauma," inside a key MAGA leader's plans for a new Trump agenda. It's based in part on videos ProPublica and Documented obtained of private speeches Vought gave at invitation-only annual gatherings at his pro-Trump think tank, the Center for Renewing America. This is a clip from a speech earlier this year when Vought outlines the legal rationale for invoking the Insurrection Act, a law that empowers the president to use the military for domestic law enforcement.
We are trying to build at the Center for Renewing America almost a shadow Office of Management and Budget. We're trying to build a shadow Office of Legal Counsel so that when a future president says, what legal authorities do I need to shut down the riots, we want to be able to shut down the riots and not have the legal community or the defense community to come in and say that's an inappropriate use of what you're trying to do.
That's Russell Vought, Trump's nominee to head the Office of Management and Budget, key Project 2025 architect. This is an excerpt of another video ProPublica and Documented obtained. It's from a speech last year by Vought delivered during a private gathering of the Center for Renewing America, that pro-Trump think tank. Here, Vought describes his goal of defunding federal bureaucracies under a potential Trump second administration.
We want the bureaucrats to be traumatically affected. We want, when they wake up in the morning, we want them to not want to go to work because they are increasingly viewed as the villains. We want their funding to be shut down so that the EPA can't do all of the rules against our energy industry because they have no bandwidth financially to do so. We want to put them in trauma.
So that's Project 2025 architect Russell Vought speaking in a video obtained by Molly Redden, reporter at ProPublica, who covers national politics and elections. Molly, welcome to Democracy Now! Why don't you lay out what you found, the most important takeaways from these videos that you've now gotten a hold of, who Vought is?
Vought was the director of the Office of Management and Budget at the end of Trump's first term, and he's returning to that position. What that office does is it sets spending priorities for the entire federal government. So Congress writes the check, and then the OMB directs how that money is spent, either through regulations or just pipelining the money. And there's obviously a lot of power in that. And Vought, what he talked about in these videos and these sort of unguarded moments is a really expansive and aggressive vision of executive power to sort of take that money and spend it the way that Trump envisions it for, a stronger executive branch, less environmental regulation, really according to sort of what they laid out in Project 2025. So really not letting Congress control the spending agenda anymore, but leaving it in the hands of a very small group of people to achieve, exactly what Trump laid out on the campaign trail and what Vought and others laid out in Project 2025. So he's in a really powerful position, and he has a really targeted and aggressive vision of how to, execute what Trump has been talking about.
Now, explain what the OMB does, the Office of Management and Budget, why it's such a powerful position.
It's such a powerful position because, first of all, it oversees all of the regulations that the administration puts out. So, Congress can write a check for, you heard him in those videos talk about defunding the EPA and making sure regulators don't have what they need. So even if Congress appropriates money for clean water regulation, scrubbing pollution from the atmosphere. Vought and his agency can oversee how rules get technically written so that that money can dry up. That's just one example. They really get into the details of how you spend money, and that's just so incredibly powerful because that's really where the rubber meets the road for any policy in any administration.
And talk more about why being in that position would matter when it comes to his support for deploying the military at home on the streets of the United States.
That has a little bit more to do with the work that Vought did between the two Trump administrations. So he founded a think tank called the Center for Renewing America. And what that think tank did is, in between the two administrations, sort of in that interim, it played host to a number of people who had been in high-up positions of the Trump administration, and they, incubated and drafted a lot of ideas for what a second Trump administration could do to execute its agenda more effectively. And I think we all remember from the first Trump administration, the president cycled through a lot of appointments who came from more traditional Republican institutional backgrounds, and a lot of them stood in the way, sort of acted as a bulwark against some of the more aggressive and history-defying things that Trump wanted to do, deploying the military against protesters during the summer of 2020. George Floyd protests is a really good example of this. And so, that's over in the second Trump administration, right? You can see from his appointments whether they're, people who have defended his agenda really aggressively on Fox News, or people like Russ Vought who have been thinking for 4 years about how to build a legal framework and staff an administration that will do whatever Trump wants. They are really focused on making sure that they have an administration that is loyal to Trump rather than, focused on what existing law says you can do. So at the Center for Renewing America, one of the things that Vought spoke about in those videos, they are preparing legal doctrines, basically, that will rationalize Trump's domestic deployment of the military. Another thing that Vought has been a really big proponent of is, your viewers might be familiar with Schedule F, which is basically a way to reclassify government civil servants so that they're all political appointees and easier to fire if they don't comply with what the administration wants them to do.
Molly, I wanted to go back to August when we reported an Undercover video that showed Russell Vought bragging about his ties to Trump, even as Trump was trying to distance himself from Project 2025. It shows Vought meeting in a 5-star Washington, D.C. hotel with 2 men who he thought were relatives of a wealthy conservative donor. He was actually talking to 2 undercover reporters with the Center for Climate Reporting, an independent British news outlet. They were secretly recording him. This is part of the video accompanying their investigation called Undercover in Project 2025, the secret of second phase and the radical policies set for rollout on day 1.
We want to meet the man writing the game plan for Trump's second administration. Vought believes that in his first term, Trump's agenda was frustrated by what he calls the deep state. So Vought is planning a radical centralization of government power under the president, firing civil servants and ending the independence of agencies like the FBI and DOJ.
80% of my time is working on the plans of what's necessary to take control of these bureaucracies, and we are working doggedly on that, whether it's destroying their agency's notion of independence. They're independent from the president.
Vought has also been preparing documents based on fringe legal theories, arguing the president has the power to use the military against protesters.
George Floyd obviously was not about race. It was about destabilizing the Trump administration. Right. We put out, for instance, a 50-page paper designed for lawyers to know that the president has, the ability both along the border and elsewhere to maintain law and order with the military, and that's something that it's going to be important for him to remember and his lawyers to affirm. But we've given them the case for that.
With loyalists installed in key government agencies and armed with his playbook, Vought believes a radical Christian nationalist agenda can be realized under a second Trump presidency. For example, on abortion.
So I think the president's actually come up with a strategy that works, so long as you are giving people like me in the government the ability to block funding for Planned Parenthood, block funding for fetal tissue research. What I've told people is he had the most pro-life record ever. I've never seen him to stand in the way of a pro-life initiative that actually was real, politically and with momentum.
So that was a report from a British climate justice group that went and spoke to him. He thought he was talking to, that's Russell Vought, wealthy conservative donors. They videoed him as he spoke. But if you can comment from your research on the implications of what he said, right down to blocking the federal funding for Planned Parenthood, which runs hundreds of clinics all over the country for women's health care.
I think what you can see in that video and in some of our reporting is that a lot of what Trump said on the campaign trail to distance himself from things that were really unpopular, like Project 2025 and its vision for really concentrating an extremely aggressive amount of power in the executive branch, like new restrictions on abortion, on reproductive rights, on Planned Parenthood. I think what that shows is that a lot of those were political movements, those were political maneuvers meant to reassure voters who, really felt uneasy with voting for Trump, given that that's what his allies talked about his plans to do. And so I think, now that Trump has unified control of Congress and the Republicans and is feeling really good about, he's described himself as having a mandate, you're probably going to see a lot of what he denied he was going to do on the campaign trail. You're probably going to see that come to pass, at least some of it. I think Vought's appointment is a really good piece of evidence for that. Vought, as you described it, he was a key architect of Project 2025. A lot of the folks who worked at his think tank, the Center for Renewing America, were really instrumental in putting the plan together. He wrote a really key chapter about executive power and how to transform the presidency into the most powerful it's ever been. And so, I think Project 2025 is going to be right at home in the White House.